The American Civil War was one of the most important historical events in American history. It transformed America politically, economically, and socially. After the Civil War, many dramatic changes occurred that altered the lives of Americans and the country as a whole forever. The Civil War fundamentally changed America because it changed the political power in the society, it increased the expansion of economy, and it made the society welcome new social changes. Prior to the Civil War there was two political stances: Federalists who favored the Constitution's balance of power between the states and the national government, and Anti-Federalists who favored a strong central government and therefore were against the Constitution. From these two sides arose two political parties called Democrats and Republicans. After the Civil War, federalism was more favorable in the country was declared a federal government. Richard Bensel, an American political historian at Cornell University, stated that after the war, you have a social base that supports federal power. That's a big change. This forced the South to adopt this new way of life. The country, which has always been divided when it came to government, is now forced to be merged into one type of government. Prior to the Civil War, a president has never been impeached before, and the government had a great authority over the people. When Abraham Lincoln was assassinated and Andrew Johnson claimed the throne, the people and especially Congress was not very happy and wanted to impeach him. With Congress mainly composed of Republicans and Johnson was a Democratic, opposing arguments and points of views clashed with each other from the two sides. Because of Congress disagreements with Johnson, they composed a plan to kick him out of office. To do this, Congress passed the Tenure of Office Act, which stated, the president could not remove cabinet officers during the term of the president by whom they may have been appointed without the consent of the government. The Congress turned from something that helps the president to something that is trying to destroy the president. The president now had limited political powers and the Congress's political powers increased, which was a major change in the political system. On February 24, 1868, Congress for the first time impeached a president on high crimes and misdemeanors, which showed how powerful Congress had become. Previously to the Civil War, the main portion of the African Americans were classified as slave, and all of them did not have the same privileges as the white Americans. The Emancipation Proclamation arose during the war, which freed the slaves in the Confederacy. This event caused America to reconsider what rights African Americans had in the society. The 15th Amendment was born shortly after and changed African Americans' lives drastically by allowing the African Americans the right to vote. Author Staff wrote that, President Grant states, the adoption of this 15th Amendment completes the greatest civil change and constitutes the most important event that ever has occurred since the nation came into life. African Americans now had more freedoms and rights than they previously did, giving them now some political power in their society. This amendment also allowed them to be elected into public office, which was never even considered before the war began. Political power in the society was drastically different prior to the Civil War than after the Civil War. New powers for the Congress and African Americans arose, and a whole governmental system was destroyed and a new adopted. These changes forever altered America's politics. The economy of the people was limited and slowly growing prior to the Civil War. The North and the South had two economic systems where the North supported manufacturing and the South supported agriculture, but the economy was very static amongst both the systems. After the Civil War, the economy for the country began to will new advances, allowing more economic gains for the people. Major advancements to the medical world developed from the Civil War, revolutionizing the American society. Jonathan Letterman was an American surgeon who invented several medical advancements. Working as a medical director in several wars, he noticed the poor medical equipment and lack of medical care for the soldiers in battle and wanted to fix these problems. Jim Sekamp, an historian author, stated, by October 30, 1862, his orders had basically invented for the first time a unified ambulance, command and control, hospital administration, hospital records keeping, and logistical medical supply chain. With more medical advances present after the Civil War, the economy was more prepared for urgent illnesses and injuries, therefore it expanded the capabilities the economy performed. More medical careers arose as well, which increased jobs in America and expanded the economy. The telegraph was invented before the Civil War but did not play a huge role in the American government. The only use of it was to communicate with each other on the East Coast. During the Civil War is when telegraphs claimed its popularity. Author Alice Bradley stated, "The telegraph enabled news sources to report on the war in a timely fashion. This new popularity allowed a new media in the society to evolve. Articles written were now less biased and were more factual because the authors could get direct sources by using a telegraph. These advancements to the society expanded America's economy. After the Civil War, the Continental Railroad was born, which made an economy boom. It was a railroad that connected the East to the West and ran across the country. The railroad replaced the slower ways of transportation like wagons and horses and increased the growth of westward expansion. Many traveled by this train system to become more economically successful." The textbook, The American stated, "Settling the second 400 million acres took only 30 years, from 1870 to 1900. With an expansion of population arising and in greater supply of resources needed in the West, industrialization started to begin. This therefore shifted the country to focus on manufacturing instead of agriculture. The industry made many people wealthy and gave many people jobs. It arose many businesses and factories and ultimately led to massive productions of goods across the country." Previous to the Civil War, the economy was gradually growing. However, following the Civil War, an economic boom arose, allowing the people to acquire economic gains that bettered their life. Previously to the Civil War, the American society was not very accepting. African Americans were never incorporated into the society prior to the war, and racial discrimination was very prominent throughout the country. When Reconstruction began, the African Americans began to integrate into the society. The textbook, The American stated, "During Reconstruction, African Americans had founded many black colleges and volunteer organizations, and the percentage of literate African Americans had gradually increased. African Americans were more involved in the society and now identified more as humans after the war, while before the people saw them as property. The country became less prejudiced towards African Americans while made their society more open-minded. Before the Civil War, whites were the predominant acceptable race in the society. There was very little diversity, which created many prejudices amongst the people. Following the war, immigration began to increase in America. People saw how America had opportunities to be high in society, so many people from other countries immigrated to the country. Author Frank Smith has stated, by 1870 between 14 and 15% of the U.S. population were foreign-born, and immigrants comprised 20% of the labor force. The chance to become successful in the West enticed many people, which emerged a more diverse population in America. When these immigrants came over to America, new cultures came to America as well. This made America adopt some of the other cultures' beliefs to their culture and made them more accepting of other races. By the late 1860s, Americans in various towns and cities had begun holding ceremonies honoring the fallen veterans during battle. This celebration ultimately led to the holiday of Memorial Day. John Alexander Logan was a general in the Civil War and was dedicated a statue in Washington, D.C. Author John Koch stated what the statue represented, for the purpose of strewing with flowers or otherwise decorating the graves of comrades who died in defense of their country during the late rebellion, and whose bodies now lie in almost every city, village, and hamlet churchyard in the land. Decorating the graves of the veterans was not for looks but for admiring the veterans' courage for dying for their country. This new tradition of honoring veterans was widely accepted amongst the nation, and so favorably that it led to the adoption of Memorial Day. After the Civil War, the people were less strict on how their society should be run and allowed new expansions to be introduced. Less prejudices and new traditions arose, expanding the society. All in all, the Civil War fundamentally changed America for the better. It allowed people who did not have power previously, like the African American, to gain some political power in the government. Additionally, economic advances arose, making the American economy more advanced. Things like medicine and technologies allowed the people to have more economic opportunities. New society changes like diversity expanding and new traditions being born arose. America was forever changed from the Civil War because it changed the political power in the society, it increased the expansion of economy, and it made the society welcome new social changes.